What's up, man fans? I'm your host, Josh Black, and this is the Week 5 Draftkings Fantasy Locks. Hit me up on Instagram and Twitter, @ManFansFF, over on Facebook, @ManFansFootball. Make sure you check out the Week 5 Draftkings Fantasy Preview. That's my audio podcast. It drops every Friday, absolutely free to download, and available on all major platforms. All you gotta do is search ManFansFootball. Week 4 is in the rear view, so let's get started building these Week 5 lineups. I'm going to give you one player at every position that I think can hit 3 times cost per point. So without further ado, let's get down to business. Carolina Panthers quarterback Teddy Bridgewater. The Panthers are at the Falcons and a 2.5-point dog. Bridgewater's priced at $5,900 on DraftKings and projected for 16.8 fantasy points. The Panthers signal caller is really starting to heat up. Last week against Arizona, he finished as QB4 in fantasy scoring, passing for 276 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 pick. Plus, he added 32 yards on the ground and a rushing touchdown. Carolina runs this dink and dunk offense, and Teddy's average depth of target's only 6.9 yards. But I think that changes this week. Bridgewater faces off against an Atlanta defense that ranks 23rd against opposing quarterbacks. The Falcons are super thin in the secondary. Last week, they rolled into Lambeau Field down 3 of their defensive backs, and they came out of that game losing 2 more. Atlanta allows the second most passing yards per game in the NFL, and they've surrendered a league-high 13 passing touchdowns. They've been the fantasy cheat code for opposing quarterbacks. In Week 1, Russell Wilson finished as QB2 in fantasy scoring. In Week 2, Dak Prescott finished as QB1. And last week, Aaron Rodgers finished as QB3. So giddy up, Teddy B. Here's an interesting side note. The Panthers' backup running back, Reggie Bonifon, he sustained an ankle injury last week, and now he's on IR. That leaves only 2 running backs on the Panthers roster, and that should add to Teddy's rushing floor. I like Bridgewater for 300-plus passing yards, multiple touchdowns, and another 3 to 4 fantasy points on the ground. If you're playing cash games, you're playing Teddy Bridgewater. Next man up, Las Vegas Raiders running back Josh Jacobs. The Raiders are at the Chiefs in a whopping 13-point dog. DraftKings has them priced at $6,300, and Pro Football Focus has them projected for 18.3 fantasy points. You guys remember Josh Jacobs, right? The number 1 running back in fantasy football after Week 1? Dude's been MIA since. He also hasn't scored a touchdown since. But I think he bounces back in a major way this week. Jacob draws a Kansas City defense that ranks 11th against opposing running backs. So it sounds like a bad matchup. But don't let the stats fool you. The Chiefs allow 161 rushing yards per game. That's bottom 5 in the NFL. And they've surrendered 5.3 yards per carry. That's second most in the league. It's a short week for Kansas City's defense, and it'll be a long day if they let Josh Jacobs average 5 yards per attempt. He averaged over 101 rushing yards per game against them last season, and I like that trend to continue. I like him for 100-plus rushing yards this week. Add another 3 or 4 catches, and that's your 3 times cost per point. If he hits pay dirt, then we hit a home run. You can lock him in. Let's go deep and talk about New York Giants wide receiver Darius Slayton. The Giants are at the Cowboys and a 10-point dog. Slayton's priced at $4,800 on DraftKings and projected for 13.2 fantasy points. After a hot start in Week 1, Slayton's been a non-factor, averaging a measly 7 fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks. But this week, he gets the super juicy matchup against Dallas. They've allowed the second most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And I'll save you the laundry list of guys who've wrecked them. Just know they've given up the second most passing touchdowns in the NFL, and over the last 3 weeks, they've allowed an opposing wide receiver to finish as wide receiver 1 in fantasy scoring every single week. This time, it's Slayton's turn to eat. Dude leads the Giants in routes run, and he holds a 16% target share. He may not finish as wide receiver 1, but at $4,800, he doesn't have to. We need 15 fantasy points to hit value, and I think he gets there on catches and yardage alone. Sprinkle in a touchdown, and that's the recipe for fantasy goodness. If you're looking for a cash game wide receiver, Darius Slayton's your guy. Let's circle back to that Raiders-Chiefs game and talk about Las Vegas tight end Darren Waller. The Raiders are at the Chiefs and a 13-point dog. DraftKings has Waller priced at 5,900 and Pro Football Focus has him projected for 13.9 fantasy points. We talk about this dude almost every week. Waller got back on track last time out against Buffalo, posting 9 catches for 88 yards. This week, he's up against a Kansas City defense that ranks 18th against opposing tight ends, so nothing too scary about the matchup. Waller currently leads all tight ends with 39 targets and 29 catches, due in large part to a leaky Raiders defense that's got them playing from behind more often than not. In both games against Kansas City last season, Waller led the Raiders in targets, catches, and receiving yards. I like history to repeat itself this week. And even though I'm high on Josh Jacobs, I think Vegas is right. The Raiders should be playing from behind in the second half, and it's going to be the Darren Waller show. This game has an astronomical 56-point total, so you're going to need some exposure. I like Waller for 8 to 10 catches, 100-plus receiving yards, and a touchdown. You can lock him in. Let's round out the Week 5 DraftKings fantasy locks with the New England Patriots defense. They're at home this week against Denver, and there's no spread yet on this game. DraftKings has them priced at 4,200 and projected for 6.9 fantasy points. This is my no-brainer play of the week at defense. And how much you want to bet they go under-owned? Last week, the Patriots defense actually outplayed the box score. They held CEH under 65 yards rushing and limited Travis Kelce to only 10 fantasy points. This week, they get a fantastic matchup against Denver. The Broncos rank 23rd against opposing defenses. Their offense is suspect after injuries to Drew Lock, Courtland Sutton, and Noah Fant. And they just made the Jets defense look good last week. And after Week 4's loss to Kansas City, I expect the Patriots defense to come out and lay the smackdown on Denver. I guarantee people are going to fade this play too. New England's price jumped $1,600 and their offense looked terrible without Cam Newton. But I don't care. I think New England smashes their projection. I'm firing them up with confidence this week, and so should you. And that's a wrap on the Week 5 DraftKings Fantasy Locks. If you like what you hear, hook us up. Like, share, subscribe. Follow us on social. We're at ManFansFF on Instagram and Twitter, and at ManFansFootball on Facebook. Don't forget to download the Week 5 DraftKings Fantasy Preview. It's absolutely free to download and available on all major platforms. Just search ManFansFootball. Good luck this week. I hope you guys see some green screens, and I'll catch you on the flip side.